Jake Martinez was having what he considered a perfectly normal Tuesday evening in Detroit. Which is to say, he was under the hood of a 2003 Ford pickup that had more rust than metal, cursing at whoever designed the alternator placement, when the sky suddenly lit up like someone had plugged in the world's biggest Christmas tree. "Oh, come on," Jake muttered, wiping grease on his coveralls. "Can't even fix a truck without aliens showing up. This is exactly why I moved out of downtown." The beam of light that engulfed him felt like being dunked in warm jello, which was honestly not the worst sensation he'd experienced that week. When the tingling stopped, Jake found himself standing in what could only be described as the galaxy's most pretentious operating room. Everything was chrome and glowing panels, like someone had let a disco ball design a hospital. "Greetings, primitive specimen," announced a tall, blue-skinned alien wearing what appeared to be a lab coat made of liquid mercury. "I am Dr. Klennox, chief researcher of the Vortakian Science Collective. You have been selected for our comprehensive behavioral studies." Jake looked around at the assembled team of aliens, all staring at him with the intensity of kids watching a bug under a magnifying glass. One was frantically scribbling notes, another was holding some kind of scanning device that kept making unfortunate beeping sounds, and a third looked like he was trying very hard not to throw up. "Selected," Jake repeated slowly. "Right. And I suppose you sent me an invitation that got lost in the mail." "Your sarcasm is noted and will be documented," Dr. Klennox replied, apparently missing the point entirely. "We have traveled 17 light years to study your species' primitive responses to controlled stimuli." 17 light years, huh? Jake crossed his arms. "And the best you could do was kidnap a mechanic from Detroit? Not exactly hitting the intellectual jackpot there, Doc." The note-taking alien looked up nervously. "Sir, perhaps we should have grabbed one from that Harvard place instead." "Silence," Dr. Blix Klennox snapped. "Location is irrelevant. All humans possess the same basic neurological framework." Jake snorted. "Oh, buddy, you have no idea what you just got yourself into." The scanning alien, who couldn't have been older than whatever passed for college age in alien years, waved his device excitedly. "The subject's stress hormones are remarkably low. Perhaps humans are naturally docile when removed from their environment." "Kid, I hate to break it to you," Jake said, "but I'm not stressed because this isn't even the weirdest thing that's happened to me this month. Last week, my neighbor's pit bull learned how to open doors. Yesterday, my ex-wife called to tell me she's dating my cousin. Trust me. Alien kidnapping is maybe a 6 on my personal disaster scale." Dr. Klennox's confident expression flickered. "Regardless, you will comply with our research protocols. Resistance is futile and scientifically counterproductive." "Resistance is futile?" Jake laughed. "Did you guys learn English from Star Trek reruns? Because I've got news for you, Doc. I'm from Detroit. We don't do futile. We do spite, stubbornness, and an unhealthy amount of caffeine withdrawal. You want to study human behavior? Congratulations, you're about to get a masterclass." The security alien, built like a purple refrigerator with anger management issues, stepped forward. "Dr. Klennox, perhaps we should sedate the specimen before proceeding." "The name's Jake Arnold Schwarzenegger," Jake shot back. "And good luck with that sedation thing. I've built up an immunity to most chemicals thanks to 30 years of breathing Detroit air and drinking gas station coffee." Dr. Klennox was beginning to look less like a confident scientist and more like someone who was realizing they'd grabbed a wolverine instead of a hamster. Again, the preliminary examinations. Subject compliance is not required for basic physiological measurements. "Oh, this should be fun," Jake muttered, rolling up his sleeves. "Fair warning, gentlemen. I didn't ask to be here, I didn't agree to be here, and I sure as hell am not going to make this easy for you. You want to study human behavior? Hope you took good notes because class is officially in session." The tour of the Vortakian research facility was like being shown around a museum by someone who had never actually visited a museum but had heard about them in a fever dream. "Doctor." Klennox led Jake through corridor after corridor of gleaming equipment that sparked, hummed, and occasionally made sounds like a dying whale. "This is our primary observation chamber," Klennox announced proudly, gesturing to a room full of monitors that kept flickering between static and what looked like alien soap operas. Our quantum neural scanners can detect the slightest emotional fluctuation in any sentient being. Quantum neural scanners, Jake repeated, watching one of the machines catch fire in the background. Is that what we're calling broken TVs now? Dr. Blix, the nervous note-taker, whispered urgently to his colleague, should someone put that out? It does that sometimes, replied Zort, the young intern, with the kind of misplaced enthusiasm that suggested he'd never seen anything actually work properly. The fire is just excess quantum energy being released. Totally normal. Kid, I've seen more advanced technology in a 1990s Radio Shack, Jake observed. And that's saying something because Radio Shack was already falling apart in the 90s. Grax, the security chief who looked like someone had taught a boulder to walk upright and hold grudges, grunted disapprovingly. The human specimen shows insufficient awe at our superior technology. Oh, I'm full of awe, Jake assured him. I'm in awe that you managed to travel 17 light years without blowing yourselves up. Although judging by the scorch marks on every surface, it was probably a close thing. They moved to what Klennox called the behavioral analysis chamber, which was essentially a white room with a chair, a table, and approximately 14 different machines that all seemed to be pointing at the chair with what could only be described as malicious intent. Please sit, Dr. Klennox instructed. We will begin with basic cognitive assessments. Sure thing, Jake said, pulling out the chair and immediately noticing it was wired to more cables than a space shuttle. Let me guess. This is where you zap me and see how I react. The neural stimulation is completely harmless, Blix assured him, though his 3 eyes were twitching nervously. We've tested it on 17 different species. And how many of those species are still alive? Jake asked casually. The silence that followed was what Jake's grandmother would have called telling. The mortality rate is well within acceptable parameters, Klennox said finally. Acceptable to who? Jake settled into the chair anyway, because he was curious to see just how badly they could screw this up. Your insurance company? Zort bounced excitedly. Oh, we're going to learn so much. Humans are supposed to be incredibly violent and unpredictable. The galactic database says your species fights wars over resources, territory, and something called sports teams. Kid, you don't know the half of it, Jake said. We once had a war because someone threw a bucket out a window and hit the wrong guy. We called it the War of Jenkins' Ear. Look it up. Fascinating, Klennox murmured, making notes. Begin the first stimulus test. One of the machines hummed to life and shot what appeared to be a small laser at Jake's forehead. Jake waited a moment, then looked around expectantly. Well, Klennox asked, how do you feel? Like I'm sitting in a chair being stared at by a bunch of aliens who clearly didn't think this through, Jake replied. Was something supposed to happen? Blix checked his readings frantically. Sir, the neural stimulator shows normal output, but there's no measurable response from the subject. Try increasing the intensity, Klennox ordered. The machine made a more enthusiastic humming sound and hit Jake with what looked like a small lightning bolt. Jake blinked once. Anything? Klennox asked hopefully. Well, now I'm mildly annoyed, Jake said. But that's mostly because you guys keep interrupting me. I was in the middle of fixing a truck, you know. Guy's supposed to pick it up tomorrow morning. Grax stepped forward menacingly. Perhaps the specimen requires more direct motivation. Oh, please, Jake stood up, yanking the cables loose with a series of concerning sparks. You think I'm intimidated by Discount Hulk over here? Buddy, I've been threatened by guys twice your size for half the money you probably owe on this flying disaster you call a ship. That's when 3 different alarms started going off, because apparently unplugging yourself from alien science equipment was frowned upon in Vortakian research protocols. The subject has damaged our equipment, Blix announced unnecessarily, since everyone could see the smoke. Welcome to Humans 101, Jake said cheerfully. We break things. It's kind of our specialty. Jake had to admit, for a bunch of aliens who could travel faster than light, the Vortakians were remarkably bad at basic problem solving. After he'd unplugged himself from their neural stimulator and caused what Blix kept calling a minor catastrophic systems failure, they'd decided to try a different approach. Unfortunately, their idea of a different approach was to move him to a different room with different equipment that looked just as likely to explode. "This is our advanced behavioral modification chamber," Klennox announced, apparently having learned nothing from the previous disaster. "The electromagnetic field generators will create controlled environmental stress to observe your species' adaptation mechanisms." Jake looked around at the new setup, which involved what appeared to be a giant hamster wheel surrounded by spinning laser pointers. "Doc, I've got to ask, did you guys get your degrees from the same place that certified those people who designed the Titanic?" "Your primitive understanding of our technology is expected," Klennox replied stiffly. "Please enter the observation sphere." "The observation sphere?" Jake peered at what was essentially a clear plastic ball big enough for a human to stand in. "You want me to get in the hamster ball?" "It's a sophisticated containment unit designed to monitor subject responses in a controlled environment," Zort explained eagerly. "Kid, it's a hamster ball," Jake said. "I've seen these at pet stores. They sell them for $12. But Jake climbed in anyway, partly because he was curious, and partly because he'd noticed something interesting about the way the equipment was wired. See, the thing about being a mechanic is that you develop an eye for how things are supposed to be connected versus how they actually are connected. And the Vortakian approach to electrical work appeared to be plug everything into everything and hope for the best. "Initializing behavioral stress protocols," Blix announced, pushing what was probably the wrong button. The room filled with flashing lights, rotating platforms, and a sound like a dozen blenders having an argument. Jake stood in his plastic sphere, watching the chaos with professional interest. "Fascinating," Klennox was saying. "The subject shows no signs of panic or disorientation." "That's because this is basically a really expensive carnival ride," Jake called out over the noise. "And not even a good one. The tilt-a-whirl at the county fair is scarier than this." Then Jake noticed something that made him grin. One of the spinning laser devices was wobbling. Not wobbling like it was supposed to wobble, but wobbling like a wheel with a loose lug nut. And if there was one thing Jake knew, it was loose lug nuts. He started rocking gently in his sphere, timing his movements with the wobbling laser. Just a little push here, a little momentum there. "Dr. Klennox," Blix said nervously. "The subject appears to be moving in a calculated pattern." "Impossible. The containment sphere prevents any meaningful movement," Klennox replied, just as Jake's careful rocking sent the sphere rolling directly into the wobbly laser device. The impact was beautiful. The laser spun off its mounting, crashed into a control panel, which sparked and set off a chain reaction that took out half the room's equipment in a cascade of explosions that would have made Michael Bay proud. "How did he do that?" Zort squeaked, diving behind a chair as debris rained down. "Simple physics, kid," Jake called out from his now stationary sphere. "Force equals mass times acceleration. I've got the mass, you guys provided the acceleration with your spinning death traps, and physics did the rest." Grax stormed over to the sphere, his purple face turning an interesting shade of violet. "The specimen deliberately sabotaged our equipment." "The specimen's name is Jake, and he's just getting started," Jake replied cheerfully. "See, the thing about humans is, we're really good at breaking things. Not just accidentally, though we do plenty of that too. We're good at breaking things on purpose, in exactly the way that causes the maximum amount of inconvenience for whoever annoyed us in the first place." "This is unprecedented," Klennox muttered, staring at the smoking remains of his behavioral modification chamber. "Our research indicated that humans become docile when removed from familiar environments." "Your research was wrong," Jake said, stepping out of the sphere as Blix fumbled with the door controls. "Humans don't become docile when you kidnap us, Doc. We become creative. And trust me, you really don't want to see how creative a guy from Detroit can get when he's properly motivated." As if to prove his point, Jake casually reached over and unplugged what looked like a main power cable, plunging half the lab into darkness. "Oops," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Looks like your primary electrical system has a design flaw. You might want to get that looked at." By the time Jake had accidentally caused his fourth major system failure, the Vortakian research team was starting to realize they might have made what Dr. Blix kept euphemistically calling a significant procedural error. What they'd actually made was the mistake of kidnapping someone who approached problem-solving the way a hurricane approaches mobile home parks. Status report, Dr. Klennox demanded, looking significantly less composed than he had an hour earlier. His mercury lab coat now had several singed spots, and one of his eye stalks was twitching. Life support is functioning at 60% capacity, Blix reported, consulting a tablet that kept sparking. Environmental controls are offline. The gravity generators are stuck in a feedback loop. And the specimen has somehow turned our own security system against us. I prefer the term user, Jake called out from his new position inside the specimen storage area, where he'd built what could generously be called a fort out of overturned tables, disconnected equipment, and what appeared to be a collection of alien houseplants. The security system implies it was actually secure. This thing has more holes than Swiss cheese made of Swiss cheese. The security system in question was now playing what sounded like alien death metal at full volume while shooting harmless but annoying light beams in random directions. Jake had managed this by the simple expedient of crossing a few wires and jamming a pen into what was obviously a volume control. How is this possible? Zort wailed, dodging a spinning scanner that had come loose from the ceiling. Humans are supposed to be a primitive species. They haven't even achieved faster than light travel. Kid, we haven't achieved faster than light travel because we're too busy figuring out how to break other people's faster than light travel, Jake explained patiently. It's a different skill set, but equally useful. Drax, who had been trying to breach Jake's improvised fortress for the past 20 minutes, was now stuck halfway through what used to be a ventilation grate. This is impossible. No being should be able to turn a simple research facility into a war zone. War zone? Jake looked around at the chaos he'd created with genuine confusion. This isn't a war zone. This is a light Tuesday afternoon in downtown Detroit. You want to see a war zone? Wait until I really get warmed up. As if summoned by his words, another piece of equipment chose that moment to explode. This one was apparently connected to the ship's environmental systems, because suddenly the air smelled like a combination of ozone and what Jake could only describe as disappointed vegetables. Dr. Klennox, Blix said urgently. Perhaps we should consider returning the specimen to its point of origin and selecting a different research subject. Absolutely not, Klennox snapped, though his confidence was clearly wavering. We are scientists. We do not surrender to our test subjects, no matter how unexpectedly destructive they prove to be. Your funeral, Doc, Jake said cheerfully, then proceeded to demonstrate his point by casually pulling a handful of cables out of what looked like a main distribution panel. The lights went out, came back on in strobing rainbow colors, and somewhere in the distance, something that sounded like a fire alarm started wailing. What did you do? Klennox demanded. I honestly have no idea, Jake admitted. But whatever it was, it sounds expensive. Dr. Blix was now frantically consulting multiple screens, all of which were displaying what appeared to be error messages in 17 different alien languages. Sir, that was the central nervous system hub for the entire vessel. He's basically given our ship the equivalent of a massive stroke. A stroke implies there was a brain to begin with, Jake observed. From what I've seen, you guys are operating on more of a reflexive nervous system, like a really complicated jellyfish. That's when the artificial gravity decided to take a coffee break. Jake, who had been expecting this ever since he'd noticed the artificial gravity generator making unhappy humming sounds, had already braced himself against his fortress walls. The Vortakian research team, on the other hand, found themselves floating in a tangled mess of limbs, lab coats, and wounded dignity. Artificial gravity is offline, Blix reported unnecessarily, since he was currently spinning slowly in midair with his tablet floating just out of reach. Well, that's what happens when you connect your gravity generator to the same power grid as your disco lights and coffee makers, Jake said reasonably. Basic electrical engineering, guys. You don't put critical life support on the same circuit as your entertainment systems. How do you know about our electrical systems? Klennox demanded from his current position upside down near the ceiling. Doc, I've been paying attention for the past 2 hours. Your wiring is color-coded, your maintenance panels are clearly labeled. And every single system on this ship is connected to every other system in ways that would make a fire marshal weep. It's like someone took a perfectly good starship and rewired it using a diagram drawn by a drunk toddler. Floating in zero gravity, while the ship's systems played an elaborate symphony of failure around them, Jake had to admit this wasn't quite how he'd planned to spend his evening. But if life as a Detroit mechanic had taught him anything, it was that every disaster was just an opportunity in work clothes. "Dr. Klennox," he called out to the upside-down alien, "I think we need to have a little chat about your situation here." "Our situation?" Klennox managed to right himself by grabbing onto a floating piece of debris. "You're the one who destroyed our research facility." "Your research facility was pre-destroyed," Jake corrected. "I just expedited the process. But here's the thing, Doc. Right now you've got a choice. You can keep trying to run experiments on the guy who's already proven he can turn your high-tech spaceship into a very expensive piece of space junk. Or you can start thinking about how to get out of this mess with your dignity and your insurance premiums intact." Before Klennox could respond, a new voice spoke up from near the ventilation system. Finally, someone with sense. Everyone turned to see what appeared to be a janitor floating near an air vent, holding a mop that looked like it had seen better decades. The alien was smaller than the others, with grayish-green skin and the weary expression of someone who'd spent too many years cleaning up other people's mistakes. "Who are you?" Klennox demanded. "Mop," the janitor replied. "Senior sanitation engineer, third shift. And let me tell you, I am sick and tired of cleaning up after you scientists. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get quantum residue out of ventilation systems? And don't get me started on the paperwork when you idiots blow up the gravity generator." Jake grinned. "Mop, my friend, you look like someone who knows how this ship actually works." "Somebody has to," Mop grumbled. "These geniuses couldn't find their way out of a paper bag if it came with a map and a GPS. You want to get off this floating disaster? I can help. But only because I'm tired of filing incident reports every time they try to advance the cause of science." "Mop, you are speaking my language," Jake said. "What do you need?" "What was?" "First, we need to get to the waste processing center," Mop explained. "It's the only system on this ship that's not connected to everything else, because even these idiots know you don't want your garbage disposal talking to your life support." "Hey," Zort protested weakly, still spinning slowly near the ceiling. "Our interconnected systems approach is revolutionary." "Your interconnected systems approach is why I spend 16 hours a day cleaning up explosions," Mop shot back. "Now, if you can get us to waste processing, I can use the emergency purge system to blow us into the escape pod bay." Jake considered this. "You want to shoot us through the garbage chute?" "It's not a garbage chute. It's a waste processing transfer conduit," Mop corrected. "Totally different. Much more dignified." "I love this plan," Jake declared. "It's got that perfect combination of insane and practical that makes me homesick." "What's the catch?" "Well, we'll need to shut down the artificial gravity in the waste processing section, reverse the flow direction, and somehow time it so we don't get liquefied by the recycling systems." "Piece of cake," Jake said. "I've been breaking this ship's systems all day. It's time to put that experience to good use." Dr. Klennox, who had been listening to this conversation with growing horror, finally found his voice. "You cannot simply commandeer our vessel using our own waste disposal system." "Doc, 30 minutes ago you couldn't figure out why your neural scanner was playing what sounded like alien elevator music," Jake pointed out. "I don't think you're in a position to tell anyone what they can or can't do with your equipment." "Besides," Mop added, "technically, I'm not helping him escape. I'm performing emergency maintenance on the waste processing system. If he happens to get accidentally ejected in the process, that's just a happy coincidence." Jake pushed off from his fortress, floating gracefully toward the ventilation system where Mop was waiting. "You know, Mop, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." "Let's survive the next 20 minutes first," Mop replied pragmatically. "Then we can talk about friendship." As they disappeared into the ventilation system, Dr. Klennox called after them desperately. Wait, you can't just leave us floating here. Don't worry, Doc, Jake's voice echoed back through the vents. The artificial gravity should kick back in eventually. Probably. Maybe check the manual. We don't have a manual, Blix wailed. Well, there's your first mistake, came Jake's fading reply. 23 minutes later, Jake found himself sitting in the command center of a Vortakian research vessel, feet up on what he assumed was the captain's chair, while the entire alien crew floated in front of him in various states of defeat and resignation. The artificial gravity was working again, mostly because Jake had threatened to fix something else if they didn't get it sorted out immediately. So let me see if I understand the situation correctly, Jake said, consulting a clipboard he'd found that contained what appeared to be the ship's maintenance log. Their research vessel, which was apparently held together by hope and spare parts to begin with, is now running on backup power, backup life support, backup everything. Because your primary systems are what we in the technical field like to call completely screwed. Dr. Klennox, looking significantly less imposing while floating at eye level, nodded reluctantly. Your behavioral research project, which was supposed to last 6 months, is now what we might generously call concluded. Because your test subject has demonstrated that human behavior includes but is not limited to creative destruction, adaptive problem solving, and an apparently unlimited capacity for turning your own technology against you. Another reluctant nod. And you're now entirely dependent on the goodwill of said test subject to not, for example, figure out how to turn your faster-than-light drive into a very expensive fireworks display. Please don't, Dr. Blix whispered. Oh, I'm not going to, Jake assured him. See, the thing is, I don't actually want to be stuck on a spaceship in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of aliens who couldn't organize a one-car parade. I want to go home. I've got a truck to finish fixing, and frankly, this whole experience has been educational. But I'm ready for it to be over. You want to return to your point of origin, Klennox said carefully. I want to return to my garage, Jake corrected. And I want compensation for my time, my expertise in unfucking your systems. No. And the considerable trauma of having to watch allegedly advanced beings try to operate equipment they clearly don't understand. What kind of compensation? Grax asked suspiciously. Jake grinned. Well, let's see. You kidnapped me, held me against my will, tried to experiment on me, and then had to be rescued from your own spaceship by your janitor and the guy you were trying to use as a lab rat. I'm thinking we start with a formal apology and work our way up to financial damages. Mop, who had been quietly enjoying the proceedings from a corner, spoke up. If it helps, I can testify that this whole thing was a disaster from the start. I've been filing safety complaints about their equipment for 3 years. 3 years? Jake looked at Klennox with renewed disbelief. You've been running dangerous experiments with equipment that's been flagged as unsafe for 3 years? The pursuit of science requires calculated risks, Klennox said weakly. Doc, there's calculated risks, and there's flying around the galaxy in a ship that's one crossed wire away from turning into a brief, bright star, Jake replied. What you guys have been doing is less calculated risk and more miracle you're not already dead. 30 minutes later, Jake stood in the transporter room, watching the aliens frantically work to get their beam-me-down technology functional without accidentally teleporting him into a tree or a lake or the middle of next Tuesday. The coordinates are locked, Blix reported. You should materialize in your place of work, plus or minus 50 feet. Plus or minus 50 feet? Jake raised an eyebrow. Our targeting systems are approximate, Klennox admitted. Of course they are, Jake sighed. Just try not to drop me in Lake Erie. Before you go, Dr. Klennox said formally, I want you to know that this experience has been educational. We may need to revise our understanding of human behavioral patterns. Here's a free tip, Doc, Jake said, stepping onto the transporter platform. Next time you want to study humans, try asking first. You'd be amazed how much more cooperative we are when we're not being kidnapped and experimented on. We will take that under advisement, Klennox replied. And maybe invest in some better equipment, Jake added, and a competent electrician. and possibly some basic safety training. Energizing transport beam, Blix announced. As the familiar tingly sensation of alien teleportation technology washed over him, Jake called out one last piece of advice and give Mop a raise. He's the only one of you with any sense. Jake materialized in his garage, about 15 feet from where he'd started, which was honestly better than he'd expected. The Ford pickup was still there, hood open, alternator still stubbornly difficult to reach. He checked his watch. Somehow, despite everything, only 3 hours had passed. He walked over to his workbench, picked up his tools, and got back under the hood. Just another Tuesday evening in Detroit. Somewhere in space, a Vortakian research vessel limped toward the nearest repair station, its crew having learned a valuable lesson about the importance of asking permission before kidnapping mechanics from Detroit. The official report would list the incident as equipment malfunction during routine behavioral studies, but Mop knew the truth. And in the janitor's closet, carefully filed under incidents that were not my fault, was a handwritten note that simply read, "Humans, do not recommend for future study. Suggest trying space dolphins instead. They're probably less dangerous." 3 weeks later, Jake got a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note that read, "Formal apology and compensation for services rendered. Please do not mention this incident to other members of your species. Sincerely, the Vortakian Science Collective. P.S. Your advice about basic electrical safety has been forwarded to our engineering department." Jake deposited the check, bought a new set of tools, and made a mental note to keep an eye on the sky on Tuesday evenings. After all, you never knew when someone might need a consultant in creative problem-solving. And somewhere in the vast reaches of space, word was spreading through the galactic community. Earth humans were absolutely, definitively, not recommended for scientific study. The Janitors Union had made sure of that.